Russian planes in the skies over Estonia, submarines off the coast of Britain, drones over Poland. This is not a drill and not a coincidence. This is systematic pressure on NATO happening every day, and the First Lady of the United States addressing the press. In this video, there are two real stories from April 2026. A secret operation by Russian submarines near British cables, a wave of airspace violations across all of Eastern Europe, and unexpectedly, without consulting her husband, Melania suddenly called for a public trial in the Epstein case. What is Moscow trying to achieve, and where is the line that NATO will not allow it to cross? What is Melania trying to achieve, and where is the line that Donald will not let her cross? But let's start with Putin. What is he trying to achieve off the coast of England and in the airspace of Estonia? And what will change in Russia's policy when it becomes inconvenient for him? What will change? A ghost in the sky and a shadow underwater. April 2026. While the whole world is watching events in the Middle East, Iran-Israel negotiations, threats, something else is happening elsewhere. Far to the north, a story is unfolding that is barely being talked about. Under the cold waters of the North Atlantic, Russian submarines were moving. In the skies over Estonia, Poland, and Romania, Russian planes and drones flashed by, British and Norwegian ones too, and NATO forces were on alert. They watched, counted, and reported. Today I'll tell you two stories. They're different. One is in the sky, the other is in a completely different place, the White House. But here's the point. Russia tests NATO systematically, brazenly, and deliberately. But as for what Melania is doing, we don't know. So let's start with the air. The sky. From 2022 to 2024, Russian planes and drones violated the airspace of NATO countries between 4 and 6 times a year. This was perceived as an unpleasant but manageable backdrop to the war in Ukraine, just chance and the costs of war. And then came 2025, 18 confirmed violations in 1 year, 3 times more than in 24. More than half of all incidents, in 1 year out of 4 years of war. This is no longer a coincidence. This is policy. September 11, 2025. Remember this date, more than 24 Russian drones entered Polish airspace. 7 hours. Polish F-16s and Dutch F-35s intercepted them. 4 were shot down. German Patriot batteries on Polish soil went on combat alert. A few days later, Romania. A Geran-2 kamikaze drone Iranian-made circled over Romanian airspace for almost an hour. 2 F-16s escorted it until it left on its own. And finally, Estonia. 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets entered Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. It may not seem like much. 12 minutes is a very long time. No warning, no apologies. For the first time in the history of the alliance, Estonia invoked Article 4, the NATO emergency consultation mechanism. This happens before Article 5. What is Russia trying to achieve? First, intelligence. Every flyover provides data. How quickly does NATO respond? What detection systems do they use? Where are the weak spots? Second, fatigue. Every interception costs money, fuel, and nerves. It's exhausting. Third, testing their resolve. If no one shoots them down, it means they can keep going. If they can keep going in the air, they might try it underwater, for example. NATO has launched Operation Eastern Sentry. British Typhoons are already flying over Poland. Trump publicly stated that NATO countries are obligated to shoot down Russian planes that violate their airspace. The Kremlin called this an irresponsible statement. Well, now let's go underwater. On April 9, 2026, that is, literally yesterday, the Minister of Defense of the United Kingdom, he talked about how a few weeks ago, British military detected a Russian attack submarine in international waters north of Britain. It would seem that a submarine in open waters is legal, but the British felt that something was wrong. They set up round-the-clock surveillance, and soon it turned out that the submarine was a decoy. While it was drawing attention, 2 other vessels were operating in the same waters from GUGI. GUGI is the main directorate of deep-sea research. It's a special division of the Russian Navy. They report directly to the Minister of Defense and the President. Its specialization is underwater cables, pipelines, infrastructure, things that are on the ocean floor. In peacetime, it's mapping and reconnaissance. In wartime, it's sabotage. Googie vessels carry mini-submarines on board, which are silent and have a minimal magnetic signature. They can dive to significant depths, and they can install listening devices on cables or prepare them for destruction. Killy said it plainly. The operation was carried out under the cover of the Middle Eastern crisis. Putin was counting on the West looking the other way. Well, this time it didn't work out. Maybe it worked in other cases, something we don't know about. But maybe it was happening. The frigate St. Albans, a support tanker, Merlin helicopters, and P-8 aircraft with sonar buoys, all of this was escorting Russian vessels. Norway was also involved. The submarine eventually returned to Russia. The Googie vessels, well, they stayed in the area for a while, but then they left too. At the same time, from March 29 to April 7, the Royal Navy carried out a 10-day operation in the English Channel and the North Sea. So HMS Somerset, HMS Mercy, and Wildcat helicopters. They escorted a Russian frigate, landing ships, and the Kilo-class submarine Krasnodar, which passed through the strait. In the past 2 years, the activity of Russian warships in British waters has increased by 30%. And what are they looking for? They are looking for underwater cables. More than 99% of the world's internet traffic and international calls go through them. To cut them means to disconnect. No bombs, no missiles. Quietly, in the depths. Russia doesn't declare war. It just moves in the sky and underwater. They let Russia in. The question isn't what Russia is doing. The question is where the line is that NATO won't allow anyone to cross. And whether that line even exists. On paper, the European part of NATO looks impressive. The United Kingdom and France are the only members of the alliance outside the US with nuclear weapons. France has 4 ballistic missile submarines. Britain has 10 submarines, 4 of which carry nuclear warheads. The conventional armies of Germany, France, and Poland are substantial. Poland is actually expanding its army faster than anyone else in Europe. On paper, the military power of European NATO is quite comparable to that of Russia. However, this is a misleading impression, ladies and gentlemen. NATO's current defense posture critically depends on the United States in 4 areas: intelligence and surveillance, strategic troop deployment, command and control, and most importantly, extended nuclear deterrence. The United States provides about 70% of the alliance's military capability in key areas: advanced technology, strategic assets, and rapid deployment forces. Britain likes to call its nuclear capability independent, but experts say that's absolutely not the case. The Baltic states remain extremely difficult to defend, especially without military support from the United States. Russia could carry out an operation there not for territorial gains, but simply to test NATO's resolve and provoke the collapse of the alliance. At the summit in The Hague in 2025, the Allies agreed on 5% of GDP by 2035. Whose donkey will die, whose emperor will get sick, and they have 3.5% for the core of defense. This is a serious shift. Poland is already spending more than 4%. Germany is sharply increasing its spending, but before that they were paying 1%. Russia has so far avoided deploying direct military troops, but the current concern in the alliance is precisely that deterrence is losing its credibility as the US pulls away from Europe. After all, the threat of a direct conflict with America has always been the primary deterrent for the USSR and later for the Russian Federation. Yes, Europe and NATO are capable of deterring Russia from minor provocations in the gray zone. Deterring a full-scale attack on the Baltic states is much more doubtful. Winning a conventional war without the US is most likely not possible. The likelihood of a decisive victory over a prepared Russian army without American involvement is significantly lower. Well, why is Russia staging these provocations? Well, obviously, so to speak, we understand that Russia is trying to gather any intelligence it can and wants to know whether the alliance is truly united or if it's just a facade. Will Germany withstand the pressure? Will Estonia back down? Will all 30 agree? Will 2 countries agree to risk war for the sake of one small, not very important country? Every incident without a firm response is a signal to Moscow. Why don't we go a little further? Every interception costs NATO money, fuel, personnel, and nerves. If Russia provokes simultaneously in the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and underwater near Britain, it forces the alliance to spread its resources thin and constantly react instead of acting productively. In other words, Russia sets the pace. If you violate airspace often enough, it stops being a scandal. It becomes routine. And what has become routine? Well, that's no longer a red line. Russia is gradually shifting the boundary of what is acceptable without declaring war. Russia most likely doesn't want to fight NATO directly, but it wants what a war with NATO could give it without the war itself. Russia really wants a sphere of influence, buffer states, between itself and the West. Guarantees that Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova will never join NATO. Recognition of Russia's right to a veto over security in the post-Soviet space. Basically, Yalta to a new division of Europe. NATO stands in the way precisely because its existence and expansion destroy this sphere of influence. Russia saw what happened in Ukraine. Even without NATO, 4 years of war, hundreds of thousands of losses, the economy under sanctions, technological isolation. A war with the full alliance is on a completely different scale. The combined GDP of NATO is 20 times larger than Russia's. A conventional war would be a loss for Moscow. Nuclear options mean mutual destruction. Well, that doesn't achieve any rational goal, so why provoke? Because there is a space between peace and war, and in that space, Russia feels comfortable. Violating airspace, submarines, sabotage, attacks on infrastructure, cyber attacks. All of this creates pressure but doesn't cross the line. The goal is to force NATO to negotiate, to show that we can make things very unpleasant for you without starting a war. So it's better to make a deal on our terms. War is the last resort, not the first. But the longer provocations go unanswered, the higher the risk that someone in Moscow will decide the time has come. And what are they asking? What will happen if Putin is gone? Well, negotiations on Ukraine will become easier. His successor doesn't have a personal stake in the war like Putin does. Perhaps the conflict will be frozen and the rhetoric will soften. Some sanctions might be lifted in exchange for gestures. Russia will not return Crimea voluntarily. It will not give up nuclear weapons. It will not join NATO. It won't become a liberal democracy in 5 years. The imperial reflex goes deeper than just one person. After Stalin came Khrushchev, there was a thaw, but the Cold War continued. After Brezhnev, a few years later, came Gorbachev, and the system collapsed. But it took decades and was a unique coincidence of personality, timing, and circumstances. Putin's departure is a necessary but not sufficient condition. Russia only changes under pressure. Russia only changes under external or internal pressure. Never voluntarily sometimes. No, never voluntarily, never gradually. Always through crisis. Often through catastrophe. Reforms from above happen when the elite realizes that if something isn't changed, they'll lose everything. The most realistic combination of changes is a prolonged war, economic pressure, and a split among the elites. Not just one of the three, but all of them together at the same time. That's when the system might crack. And when? Well, it will happen at some point. Because all empires disappear, they all collapse, but we don't know when that will happen to Russia. Now let's move on to Melania and Epstein. What was that? On April 9, 1926, the First Lady of the United States of America appeared on camera in the ceremonial hall of the White House and said something that no one had asked her about. There was no scandal in the headlines, no journalistic investigation the day before, no question from the press. She didn't take any questions at all. She simply came out and declared to the whole world, "I have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein." Why? Why did she suddenly do that? That's the question, and that's exactly what we're going to answer today. So, what actually happened? Here are the facts. April 9th, in the afternoon, Melania Trump appears in the grand foyer of the White House. The location was chosen for a reason. It was right here that her husband addressed the nation about the war with Iran a week ago. She speaks for 6 minutes, without a teleprompter. No questions. Even her closest aides didn't know what she was going to talk about. What did she say? I quote from the official White House transcript, "I was never a friend of Epstein." Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump. I was not a victim of Epstein. I never flew on his plane. I never visited his island. Next, about the email. Certainly, in 2026, the Department of Justice released part of Epstein's files. Among them was a letter from Melania to Ghislaine Maxwell. She is Epstein's accomplice, convicted of human trafficking. The letter is signed, Love, Melania. Maxwell replied to her, Sweet pea, like sweet pea. Right. They're joking with each other. Oh, my sweet pea. Melania explained, it was just casual social correspondence, nothing more. And finally, the unexpected ending of the statement. She called on Congress to hold public hearings where Epstein's victims could testify under oath. That's a fact. And now, let's try. Well, the analysis. Why now? The first question everyone asked from CNN to Fox was, why now? What happened? There's no new scandal. The Epstein files came out back in January. Melania's name is mentioned there, but without any accusations. She's not in any court documents or victim testimonies. So what happened? The first version, the legal one. Journalist Michael Wolff wrote about Melania's connections with Epstein. Her lawyers demanded a retraction. Wolff refused and was the first to sue her, claiming that she was trying to intimidate him with the threat of a billion-dollar lawsuit. The case is in court. A public statement on camera from the White House is an official record for a court case. On the record, as American lawyers say. Maybe. The second one is personal. Melania Trump is someone with a strong character who makes independent decisions. For years, she has watched fake photos and stories circulate on social media, and at some point she decided, enough is enough. Her advisor said directly, if she doesn't protect herself, who will? Again, God only knows. But the third theory is strategic. The Epstein case is not closed. Congress is putting pressure on the Department of Justice. Bondi, the former Attorney General, refused to appear at the hearing on this matter. The issue will keep coming back. Bondi is not there, so it will keep coming back. And by taking the side of the victims and calling for hearings, Melania has protected herself politically. She is no longer on the side of those who keep things quiet. She is with the victims. But there is a fourth theory, the most interesting one. Donald Trump found out about his wife's statement from the news. Think about it. The First Lady makes a statement from the White House on a topic that is politically toxic for the president, and the president doesn't know about it. This isn't a slip of the tongue, it's a position. Melania Trump has long been known for acting independently, including independently of her husband. She voted differently than he expected. She appeared in public when she thought it was necessary, and disappeared when she didn't want to. She is a figure in her own right. She is an independent figure. Her call for a hearing in Congress directly contradicts the White House's position. Trump called the Epstein case a hoax. Well, a fabrication, right? His team had been saying for months, it's time to move on. And then his wife comes out to the cameras and says, give the victims the right to testify under oath. Why? Maybe she knows something that's about to come out. Maybe she wants to separate her name from the politics on this issue. Maybe that's the boldest assumption. She's sending a signal to those who don't want a real investigation. We don't know. But this isn't a random statement from a frightened person. It's a calculated move. So what now? What happened as a result of this statement? First, the Epstein topic, which was starting to fade, is back in the headlines. CNN wrote about it directly. It brought the topic back into the public sphere, into public discussion. Second, Democrats in Congress immediately supported the call for hearings. Congressman Robert Garcia stated, "We agree with the First Lady. Let the Oversight Committee schedule a hearing immediately." Republicans also did not publicly object. Third, Epstein's surviving victims suddenly came out and criticized this statement. They said that it shifts the burden onto the victims, who have already shown tremendous courage, instead of demanding action from the FBI, the Department of Justice, and so on. Fourth, the Department of Justice, under the new acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, stated that the Epstein case should not be part of anything within the department. That is, the federal investigation is effectively frozen. Here's the main contradiction. The First Lady wants hearings, but the president's husband is blocking the investigation. This is a public split in views within one family that is in power. Well, Melania is not in power. But you see, Gennady, every one of her appearances causes a stir. In conclusion, what can we say with confidence? Melania Trump is not a victim of Epstein. Officially, there are no accusations, no evidence of her involvement in any crimes. There is absolutely nothing. Her statement was personal, independent, and politically bold, precisely because it contradicted the position of the White House from which she was speaking. But it raised a question that isn't going away. Who else was close to Epstein and knew? Not Melania, others. The Epstein case is not the story of one man. It's a story about how power, money, and impunity work together, about how the people who were supposed to protect stayed silent, about how the system protects its own. Melania said, "Give the victims their day in court." That's right. The question is whether there will be enough will in Washington to do it. And I also have a fifth version, which I saved for the very end. This announcement has been made by arrangement with Donald James Trump. That supposedly it doesn't come from him. The story isn't over yet, neither with Putin nor with Melania. This has been Leon Weinstein. Until next time.